Hi. Before I tell you why my ex-husband called me 37 times in less than an hour, I want to ask you something small. If you stay with me through this story, please subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell me in the comments what you think when you hear everything. And tell me where you're watching from too. I don't know why, but there's something comforting about knowing that a story I once struggled to say out loud can reach someone sitting at a kitchen table, on a couch, or somewhere far away. My name is Marina Ellsworth, and the morning my ex-husband canceled my credit card, he expected me to panic. Instead, I smiled. That smile was the reason he should have been worried. I was standing in the parking lot of a grocery store with 2 paper bags at my feet, and a cashier's apologetic voice still echoing in my head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It says the card has been declined." At first, I thought it was a mistake. The card wasn't close to its limit. I knew that because I had always been the one who watched the accounts. I knew when the mortgage cleared, when the insurance was due, when an automatic payment increased by $6, when a subscription nobody remembered signing up for quietly renewed. I had spent years noticing things other people considered too small to matter. That habit had saved my marriage more than once. It was about to save me from my divorce. My phone rang before I could even reach my car. Graham, my ex-husband. Not technically my husband anymore, although he still spoke to me as though the divorce papers had only changed my last name on a form, rather than changing his right to control my life. I answered, "Did you try using the card?" No hello. No question about how I was. Just that. I looked through the windshield at the grocery carts rattling together in the wind. Yes, there was a pause, a satisfied one. Then Graham said the sentence I would remember with extraordinary clarity. "I canceled your card." I didn't say anything. He continued, "You'll have to pay for everything yourself now." His voice had that familiar calmness to it. Graham rarely shouted. He didn't need to. He had perfected something much more effective over the years, the ability to say cruel things in the tone another man might use to discuss the weather. I leaned against the driver's door. "You canceled it. I've been advised to separate our finances." Advised. Graham loved that word. It made his decisions sound official, even when they were personal. "And since we're divorced," he added, "there's really no reason you should still be using an account connected to me, connected to him." That was interesting. I glanced down at the card in my hand. Dark blue, silver lettering, my name embossed across the bottom. I had stared at that card hundreds of times without thinking about it. That morning, I noticed something I hadn't considered in years, not because I had forgotten, because Graham had spent a long time making sure I stopped remembering. "You're right," I said. The silence on the other end changed. He had expected an argument, maybe tears, maybe one of those exhausting conversations where I explained that the card had been used for household expenses. We had both agreed he would continue covering until the sale of our former home was complete. Instead, I said, "You're absolutely right." "What?" I said, "You're right." I could almost hear him sitting straighter. "You understand then?" "I understand perfectly." I picked up the grocery bags. "Goodbye, Graham." "Marina." I ended the call. Then I smiled. Not because I had a secret fortune, not because I had already planned revenge, and definitely not because I knew what was going to happen 2 hours later. I smiled because, for the first time in months, Graham had made a mistake that didn't require me to prove anything. He had made it in writing, and he had made it with a bank. I put the groceries in the trunk, climbed into my car, and drove 6 miles across town to the branch where we'd opened our accounts years earlier. By the time I walked through the glass doors, I wasn't angry. That mattered. Anger had always been Graham's favorite evidence against me. If I raised my voice, I was unstable. If I cried, I was dramatic. If I stayed silent, I was passive-aggressive. There was no reaction I could have that he couldn't somehow use as proof that he was the reasonable one. So I walked into the bank calmly. I gave the woman at the front desk my identification. Then I asked for something very simple. "I need to speak with someone about an account restriction." She smiled professionally. "Of course. Is this regarding fraud?" "I don't know yet." That answer changed her expression slightly. She asked me to sit. While I waited, my phone lit up once. A message from Graham. "For clarity, I have revoked your access to my credit account effective immediately. Please stop attempting transactions." I read it twice. Then I took a screenshot. Something about the wording bothered me. Not the arrogance. I was used to that. The phrase, "my credit account." I opened the banking app. The card was gone, but another account was still visible. One I hadn't touched in a long time. I stared at it. The name at the top was mine, not Graham's. Mine. Before I could open the account details, a man in a navy suit stepped into the lobby and called my name. "Ms. Ellsworth?" I stood. He introduced himself as Daniel Cho, one of the branch managers, and led me toward a small office with frosted glass walls. The moment I sat down, I slid my phone across his desk. "My ex-husband says he canceled my credit card." Daniel read the message. His expression remained neutral. "Do you have the physical card with you?" I handed it to him. He typed something, then something else. Then he stopped. It was subtle, just 1 second, in which his fingers stayed suspended above the keyboard. But I noticed. Remember what I said? I noticed small things. Daniel looked at the card, then at me. Ms. Ellsworth, when was your divorce finalized? A little over 3 months ago. And before the divorce, who handled the finances? I did. All of them. Almost all. He turned the monitor slightly away from me and clicked through several screens. Did your former husband tell you he was the primary account holder on this card? Yes. For how long? I thought about that. Years. Daniel leaned back. Did you ever verify that? The room suddenly felt very quiet. No. He nodded once, carefully. Then he asked another question. Do you remember opening this account? And just like that, I wasn't sitting in the bank anymore. I was standing in a kitchen from nearly 9 years earlier, before the divorce, before the lawyers, before Graham had started correcting me in front of other people and calling it helping. Back when we still lived in our first house, the one with the narrow kitchen and the cabinet door that never closed properly. I remembered Graham walking in one Friday evening with a bottle of sparkling cider, because we were celebrating something, not his promotion, mine. I had just signed the biggest client my small consulting business had ever landed. I had spent 4 years building that company from our spare bedroom. No investors, no inheritance, no glamorous beginning, just a secondhand desk, an old laptop, and too many nights eating reheated pasta beside spreadsheets. That client changed everything. Within a year, I had hired 2 employees. Within 3, I was making more than Graham. That was also around the time something between us quietly shifted. At first, it looked like support. You're overwhelmed, he told me. Let me take something off your plate. He started paying a few bills. Then he suggested consolidating accounts. Then he offered to handle certain financial paperwork because, as he put it, I should focus on growing the business instead of worrying about administrative details. I thought he was being a partner. That was the version of the story I told myself for years. Looking back, I can identify the exact moment the balance changed. Not when he started controlling the money. When I stopped checking, there is a difference. And sitting across from Daniel Cho that morning, I suddenly realized I had allowed Graham to narrate our finances for so long that I no longer knew which parts of the story were true. Daniel interrupted my thoughts. Ms. Ellsworth? Yes. I need to confirm something with our records department. My stomach tightened. Is there a problem? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood and closed the office door. That was when I knew this wasn't simply about a canceled card. He sat back down. What I'm about to tell you may affect more than this credit account. My phone vibrated. Graham again. I turned it face down. Daniel looked at me for a moment. Your former husband didn't close this card. I frowned, but it's declined. Yes. He said he revoked my access. Daniel's expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. He couldn't revoke your access. My hands went still. Why not? Daniel rotated the computer monitor toward me, and there, beside the account information, was a detail so basic that I couldn't understand how I had missed it for years. Primary account holder, Marina Ellsworth. I stared at the screen. That can't be right. Daniel didn't respond. Below my name was Graham's, but not where mine should have been. His name appeared under authorized user. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. But he canceled the card. No, Daniel said carefully. He reported his own card compromised. I looked at him. What does that have to do with mine? Normally? Nothing. Normally. That word landed harder than it should have. What do you mean, normally? Daniel turned the monitor back toward himself. Because when the security team reviewed the activity, something else was flagged. He clicked. Then he stopped again. This time he didn't hide his reaction. His eyebrows tightened. Ms. Ellsworth, I need to ask you something very specific. Okay? Did you authorize a change to the mailing address associated with your business reserve account 6 months ago? I felt the blood drain from my face. My what? Daniel didn't repeat the question. He didn't need to. I knew exactly what account he meant. The reserve account from my company. The one I had been told was closed years earlier after I sold my share of the business. The one Graham had personally handled the paperwork for. I leaned closer to the screen. Daniel, he looked at me. That account is supposed to be closed. Neither of us spoke. Then my phone vibrated again, and again, and again. I turned it over. Graham wasn't texting anymore. He was calling. I watched his name disappear from the screen. A few seconds later, another call came in. Then another. Daniel glanced at my phone. Is that your former husband? Yes. Don't answer yet. That was the moment everything changed. Because Graham believed he had locked me out of his money, but the bank had just discovered something very different. For years, the money he had called his had never been his to control. And what Daniel showed me next explained why, less than 2 hours after Graham confidently told me I would have to pay for everything myself, I would look down at my phone and see 37 missed calls. The canceled card wasn't the betrayal, it was the loose thread, and Graham had just pulled it himself. Daniel didn't show me everything that morning. That was probably a good thing. I was already trying to understand how an account I believed had been closed for years was still active. But to understand why Graham had access to it at all, I have to go back further. In my family, money was never just money. It was approval. It was trust. It was power. And Graham learned that very early. When I first introduced him to my parents, my mother, Helena, loved him immediately. Graham knew how to make older people feel respected. He remembered birthdays. He offered to carry bags. He asked my father questions about work and listened as if every answer mattered. My father, Richard, was harder to impress, at least in the beginning. He liked people who worked quietly and didn't talk too much about ambition. Graham understood that too. So around my father, he became modest. "I just want to build a stable life," he would say. My father approved of that. What nobody seemed to notice was how Graham adjusted himself to whoever was in the room. I noticed, eventually. But by then, he had already become part of the family. My younger sister, Natalie, adored him. She used to joke that if I ever left Graham, the family would keep him and send me away. Everyone laughed, including me. Back then, it sounded harmless. Years later, during the divorce, Natalie said something almost identical, only nobody laughed. The first real crack appeared after my business began doing well. At family dinners, my father would ask Graham about his work. Then he would ask me if I was still doing that consulting thing. I had employees by then, major clients, a waiting list. But somehow Graham's office job sounded permanent and respectable, while my company sounded like an experiment I might abandon. One Sunday, my mother served roast chicken and asked Graham whether he had considered buying a bigger house. Graham looked at me before answering. "Marina's income is unpredictable." I remember putting down my fork. "It hasn't been unpredictable in 3 years." He smiled. "I'm just being cautious." My father nodded. "That's smart." That was the pattern. Graham said something dismissive. I corrected it. Then I became the difficult one. He became reasonable. At first, I fought back. Then I learned that every correction cost me something. Peace at dinner, a pleasant weekend, my mother's approval. Eventually, silence became cheaper, and Graham noticed. After that, he started speaking for me more often. When relatives asked whether we were planning to travel, he answered. When my parents asked about the business, he answered. When someone asked how much I was working, Graham would laugh and say, "Too much. She'd forget to eat if I didn't manage everything else." Manage everything else. That phrase followed us for years. It made him sound generous. It made me sound incapable. The strange part was that Graham really did help at first. He organized bills. He compared insurance policies. He moved money between accounts when I was busy. He didn't seize control in one dramatic moment. He collected it slowly, one password, one document, one decision at a time. And because I trusted him, I handed those things over willingly. The only person who ever questioned it was Miriam, my former business partner. Miriam had built the company with me during its hardest years. One afternoon, after Graham left our office with a folder of financial documents, she watched him through the window. "Why does he need those? He's helping me organize the accounts." Miriam looked at me. "You have an accountant." I laughed. "He's my husband." She didn't laugh back. That silence stayed with me. Years later, I would remember it. But at the time, I ignored her. Because Graham wasn't behaving like a villain. He was behaving like someone useful. And useful people are difficult to question, especially when everyone around you keeps telling you how lucky you are to have them. The deeper problem began after my father invested money in the business. It wasn't a huge amount compared to what the company later became worth. But to my father, it mattered. He told Graham about the investment before he told me. I found that out accidentally. "You already knew?" I asked Graham that night. He shrugged. "Your father wanted my opinion about investing in my company. He trusts my judgment." I remember staring at him. Something inside me shifted. Not because my father had asked for advice, because Graham looked proud of the fact that he had been consulted before me. Then he kissed my forehead and said, "Don't make this into something." That became another sentence I heard often. "Don't make this into something," as though naming a problem created it. Back at the bank, Daniel was reviewing the old account history while I sat quietly across from him. Then he asked, "Who is Miriam Vale?" My head lifted. "My former business partner. She appears on several original documents." "That makes sense." Daniel hesitated. Then he turned one page toward me. There was my signature, then Miriam's, and beneath both, a third name, Graham Ellsworth. I stared at it. He wasn't a partner. Daniel looked at me carefully. According to this form, he was granted administrative authority. My stomach tightened. I never gave him that. Daniel pointed to the date. I recognized it immediately. It was the week my father had invested. The week Graham had told me not to make things into something. And suddenly I understood why that old conversation had mattered. Graham hadn't simply become involved in my finances. Someone had opened the door for him. The question was who? Daniel turned another page, and there, beside Graham's name, was the authorization signature. It wasn't mine. It belonged to my father. I stared at my father's signature until the letters stopped looking like his name. Richard Vale, my father, the man who had spent my entire childhood warning me never to sign anything I hadn't read. Yet there it was. His signature had given Graham authority over an account connected to my company. I don't understand. I said. Daniel kept his voice calm. This document gave your former husband administrative access. It did not make him an owner. Could my father legally do that? Not by himself. That answer made me look up. Daniel pointed to another section. There should have been additional authorization. From me? Yes. My chest tightened. And was there? He didn't answer immediately. That silence told me enough. Daniel turned the page. A signature appeared beneath my father's. Mine. Except it wasn't mine. It looked like mine. Same long curve on the M. Same narrow loop in the last name. But something was wrong. I knew it immediately. I had signed thousands of invoices, contracts, tax forms, checks. This signature was too careful. Someone had copied it. I leaned closer. I didn't sign that. Daniel nodded slowly. I'll note that you are disputing the authorization. My phone vibrated again. Graham. I ignored it, but suddenly the calls weren't irritating anymore. They were information. He knew something was happening. The question was how. I thought back to the week my father invested in my business. At the time, Graham had been unusually attentive. He brought dinner to the office twice. He told me I was working too hard. He even offered to organize the paperwork for my father's investment. I remember thanking him. That memory made me feel sick now. Not because I had trusted him, because I remembered exactly where the documents had been. On our dining room table, for 3 days. There had been folders everywhere, and Graham kept asking questions. Does Miriam still have signing authority? Which account receives client payments? Is the reserve account separate? I answered everything. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband. Then, 2 weeks later, Graham suggested that I stop using the reserve account directly. It creates unnecessary complexity, he said. I had been exhausted, so I agreed. That was how it happened. Not with a threat. Not with some dramatic demand. With convenience. Graham turned control into something that looked like help, and once I stopped touching the account, he became the person who always knew what was happening with it. Years passed. My company grew. Then my marriage began shrinking around it. Graham started making comments whenever I had a successful month. Don't get used to it. Or, clients can disappear overnight. When I bought myself a new laptop, he asked if it was really necessary. When he bought an expensive watch, he called it a professional expense. I began seeing the double standard. But every time I challenged him, he had an explanation ready. And usually, my mother backed him. Graham is practical, Helena told me once. You're more emotional about these things. That word, emotional, it followed me everywhere. If I noticed something unfair, I was emotional. If I questioned Graham, I was emotional. If I refused to accept an explanation, I was emotional. Eventually, I stopped trying to convince people. Miriam was the only one who still pushed. One afternoon, she closed my office door and said, "You need to look at the reserve account." I remember feeling irritated. Why? Because I asked for a statement, and Graham told accounting not to send it to me. I laughed nervously. He probably misunderstood. Marina, something in her voice made me stop. He isn't your business partner. I know. Then why is everyone starting to act like he is? I wish I could say I listened. I didn't. I defended him. That memory hurt more than I expected. Back in Daniel's office, I asked, "Can you tell me what he actually did with the account?" Daniel folded his hands. "I can tell you what the records show, but before we continue, I need your permission to restrict any administrative users while this is reviewed." "You mean Graham?" "Yes. Do it." Daniel clicked through several screens. Then he asked me to confirm my identity again. I signed 2 forms. This time, I watched every line, every box, every date. When Daniel finished, he said, "Your former husband's administrative access has now been suspended." My phone rang almost immediately. Graham, then again, and again. I looked at Daniel. He knows. Daniel didn't speculate, but his expression told me he had noticed the timing too. Then my phone lit up with a message. "What did you do?" Another arrived. "Marina, call me right now. Then, do not authorize anything at that bank until we talk." I felt something settle inside me. For years, Graham had made me feel as though I was always one step behind him. For the first time, he sounded afraid that I was moving without his permission. Daniel was still studying the account. Then his expression changed again. "Ms. Ellsworth?" I looked up. "What?" "There are outgoing transfers here." My stomach dropped. "How many?" He turned the monitor toward me. More than I expected. Much more. Regular transfers. Spread across years. Some small, some large. All going to the same destination. I read the account name. Then I stopped breathing for a second. Because the destination wasn't Graham's personal account. It belonged to someone else. Someone who had spent years telling me Graham was only trying to protect me. My mother. For a few seconds, I thought I had read the name wrong. Helena Vale, my mother. I looked at Daniel. That has to be a mistake. He didn't say it was. Instead, he enlarged the transfer history. There were payments going back years. Not every month. Not enough to look obvious. But enough. A few thousand here. Another transfer months later. Then a larger one. Always from the reserve account I believed had been closed. Always to an account connected to my mother. I felt heat rise into my face. My mother doesn't work for my company. Daniel nodded. Was she ever listed as a vendor, employee, partner, or beneficiary? No. Did you ever authorize payments to her? No. That word came out harder. No. I had helped my parents before, of course. I had paid for repairs to their house once, covered part of a medical bill for my father, bought my mother a new refrigerator when theirs broke. But those were gifts, openly discussed, never hidden, never taken from a business reserve account. My phone rang again. Graham. I declined it. Then my mother called. That was when my stomach truly turned. She almost never called during the day. I let it ring. A message arrived seconds later. Please call me before you do something you'll regret. I read it twice. Not, are you okay? Not what's happening. Before you do something you'll regret. She already knew, and suddenly a memory surfaced. 3 years earlier, Christmas dinner. My father had gone outside with Graham after dessert. My mother and I were alone in the kitchen, rinsing dishes. She had looked toward the door and said, almost casually, "You know, Graham carries a lot for you." I remember laughing. What does that mean? He handles the things you don't want to deal with. I deal with plenty. She sighed. Marina, don't be defensive. There it was again, that familiar correction. Then she added, a woman can be successful and still recognize when her husband is better at certain things. At the time, I thought we were talking about taxes, bank accounts, organization. Now I wondered what else she knew. I looked at Daniel. Can you tell who approved these transfers? He studied the records. Some appear to have been initiated through administrative access. Graham. Yes. And the rest? Daniel paused. Those were processed using your credentials. My stomach dropped. I didn't make them. I understand. No, I mean, I absolutely did not make them. He nodded. Then we'll document that as well. I sat back. For years, Graham had known my passwords. At first, because we shared everything. Later, because he convinced me it was safer for him to keep a secure record. I had changed most of them during the divorce, but maybe not soon enough. I thought about all. The nights he sat beside me with my laptop open. All the times he said, I'll handle it. All the times I was grateful. Then Daniel said something that made the room feel smaller. There's another issue. I almost laughed. Of course there was. What now? He turned the screen. One of the transfers was much larger than the others. Large enough to matter. Large enough that I remembered the exact year. Because that was the year my business almost collapsed. We had lost 2 clients within 3 months. Payroll had become tight. I had cried in my office one night because I thought I might have to let people go. Graham told me the reserve account was nearly empty. He said I had expanded too aggressively. He said my decisions had created the problem. I believed him. Worse, I blamed myself. I sold part of my ownership to stabilize the company. Miriam begged me not to. Something is wrong with the numbers, she said. I told her she was being paranoid. Eventually, that fight ended our partnership. She sold her share and walked away. For years, I carried guilt over that too. I had thought I destroyed the best professional relationship of my life because I couldn't accept hard financial reality. But the reserve account hadn't been empty. Money had been leaving it, quietly. And one of the largest transfers happened just weeks before Graham told me the company was in danger. I stared at the date. I sold part of my business because of this. Daniel said nothing. He didn't have to. My phone rang again. This time, my father. 3 people. Graham, my mother, my father, all calling within minutes of the bank freezing Graham's access. My hands went cold. This wasn't one person hiding something. It was a system, and I had been standing in the center of it for years without seeing the full shape. I finally answered one call, not Graham's, my father's. Marina, his voice sounded strained. Where are you? At the bank. Silence. Then he said, come home before you make this worse. I closed my eyes. Dad, did you know money was being transferred to Mom? Another silence. Longer this time. That was enough. You knew. It's complicated. No. My voice stayed calm. For once, don't tell me something is complicated when what you mean is that nobody wanted me to know. Marina, how much? He exhaled. You need to talk to Graham. And there it was. Even now. Even after everything. He still wanted Graham to explain my own money to me. I hung up. Daniel looked toward my phone. Are you all right? I looked at the transfer history again, then at Graham's messages piling up. I wasn't all right, but I was done being confused. Freeze every access point that isn't mine. Daniel nodded. Are you sure? Yes. I placed my phone face down. Completely. 10 minutes later, Graham's calls became relentless. And while Daniel worked, I finally understood what my ex-husband had actually done. He hadn't canceled a credit card to punish me. He had panicked. Because the moment he touched that card, the bank's security review had opened an account he had spent years teaching me not to look at. And somewhere across town, Graham had just realized the same thing. I left the bank with copies of every document Daniel was allowed to give me that day. I also left with something I had not felt in years. Clarity. Not relief. Not yet. But clarity. Graham had not simply been handling things. My parents had not simply been helping. And I had not simply made bad financial decisions. Some of those decisions had been made while I was being shown incomplete information. That Realization hurt more than the money. Because money can be counted, trust cannot. I drove straight to my parents' house. I should have gone home. I should have called an attorney. Instead, I needed to look at my mother's face. Graham's car was already in the driveway. Of course it was. When I walked inside, all three of them were waiting. My father stood near the fireplace. My mother sat stiffly on the sofa. Graham was by the window with his arms crossed. He looked furious. "You froze everything." Those were his first words. I placed the folder from the bank on the coffee table. "I froze access to accounts in my name. You had no right to do that without speaking to me." I almost smiled. "No right?" Graham stepped closer. "Don't twist this." My mother immediately interrupted. "Can everyone please stay calm? Stay calm." Another family tradition. It usually meant I was expected to absorb whatever happened next without reacting. I opened the folder. Why was money from my business reserve account being transferred to Mom? Nobody answered. I looked at my mother. "Helena?" She flinched at hearing her first name from me. "It wasn't like that." "Then tell me what it was like." My father stepped in. "Your mother needed help. For years, you were doing well." I stared at him. That sentence told me more than he realized. Because I was doing well, they had decided the money mattered less to me. "You could have asked." My mother looked down. "I didn't want to, but taking it without telling me was easier. Graham said it wouldn't affect you." There it was. I turned toward him. He didn't look embarrassed. He looked offended that the conversation was happening at all. "You told her that? They're your parents." That wasn't my question. Graham exhaled sharply. "You always said you wanted to help them." "I wanted to help them. I didn't give you permission to move money secretly. You're making it sound criminal." "I haven't called it anything." That unsettled him. I could see it. He wanted anger. Anger gave him something to fight. So I stayed calm. My father picked up one of the documents. "This is family business." "No," I said. "It was my business." He looked at me as if I had insulted him. "After everything we did for you?" That one nearly broke my composure. Because suddenly we weren't discussing transfers anymore. We were discussing debt. Not financial debt. Emotional debt. The kind families keep invisible ledgers for. We raised you. We supported you. Therefore you owe us access. I finally understood the logic. My father had invested money in my company and somehow decided that investment gave him permanent authority over what I earned afterward. My mother had accepted transfers because she believed I had more than enough, and Graham had been the bridge between them, the helpful husband, the reasonable son-in-law, the man who knew which papers to move and which questions I was too tired to ask. I looked at Graham. "Did you copy my signature?" For the first time, his face changed. Not much, but enough. My mother looked at him too. My father said, "Marina, don't start making accusations." I asked a question. Graham's jaw tightened. "I signed documents on your behalf plenty of times. With permission? You knew I handled paperwork." "That isn't permission." He laughed once, coldly. "Do you hear yourself? After all these years, you're suddenly pretending you had no idea how anything worked." That sentence struck exactly where he intended. For a moment I doubted myself. Maybe I had been careless. Maybe I had agreed to more than I remembered. Then I remembered the signature. Too neat, too deliberate. And I remembered Miriam telling me to look at the numbers. I had been careless, but someone else had used that carelessness. Both things could be true. "I want a full accounting," I said. My mother looked alarmed. "Of what?" "Everything." Graham shook his head. "You'll destroy this family over money." I looked around the room. At my father's anger, my mother's fear, Graham's contempt. Then I said the sentence none of them expected. "No, I'm trying to find out what already destroyed it." I picked up my folder. My father blocked my path. "Where are you going?" "Home." "And then what?" I met his eyes. "I'm going to call Miriam." That changed the room. My mother went pale. Graham immediately said, "There's no reason to involve her." Too quickly. Far too quickly. I stopped. "Why?" He said nothing. And for the first time, all day, I saw something stronger than anger in Graham's face. Fear. Miriam had known something years ago. Something I had refused to hear. And apparently, Graham remembered exactly what it was. I called Miriam from my car. She answered on the fourth ring. "Marina?" Just hearing her voice pulled something loose inside me. We had not spoken properly in almost 4 years. "I need to ask you about the reserve account." Silence. Then she said, "You..." Finally looked. I closed my eyes. "You knew?" "I suspected." "That isn't the same thing." "No," she said quietly. "It isn't." I told her what the bank had found. The transfers, my mother's account, Graham's access, the copied signature. Miriam listened without interrupting. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. There was more. My grip tightened around the phone. "What more?" "The year we nearly missed payroll. I reviewed the books myself. I remembered that year too well. The sleepless nights, the embarrassment. The moment I told Miriam we had to sell part of the company, I found money leaving the reserve account," she continued. "I asked Graham about it. He told me you had approved family distributions. I never did. I know that now. Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried." That hurt. Because she was right. She had tried. I had defended Graham every time. Miriam's voice softened. You told me I was undermining your marriage. I remembered saying it, every word. I was wrong. Yes, she didn't rush to comfort me, and strangely, I appreciated that. I was very wrong. Miriam was quiet for a moment. Marina, I didn't leave because the business was failing. My heart stopped. What? I left because I couldn't stay and watch Graham gain more control while you kept defending him. I stared through the windshield. For years, I had believed Miriam abandoned me when things became difficult. Graham had encouraged that version. He said she was selfish, jealous, unreliable, and I believed him. What did you do before you left? I asked. Another pause. I made copies. Of what? Everything I could. Bank statements, internal emails, authorization forms, messages Graham had sent to accounting. Miriam had kept them because something had felt wrong, even if she couldn't prove. Exactly what? Do you still have them? Yes. That one word changed the shape of the day. For the first time, I wasn't chasing memories. There were records, proof. But instead of feeling victorious, I suddenly felt exhausted, deeply exhausted, because proof could explain the money. It couldn't give me back the years I had spent doubting myself. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table. No Graham, no parents, no one telling me what my reaction should be. I opened my laptop and began changing every password I had. Banking, email, cloud storage, business accounts, one by one. It wasn't dramatic. It was almost painfully ordinary, but each password felt like a small door closing. Around midnight, my mother sent a message. We never meant to hurt you. I read it. Then another arrived. Graham was only trying to keep things stable. There it was again. Graham. Always Graham. Even now, she was explaining him to me. I didn't answer. Then my father texted, "You're tearing this family apart." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Once it would have destroyed me. That night, it didn't, because I finally understood something. A family held together by one person's silence isn't stable. It's simply quiet. I turned off my phone. The next morning, Miriam arrived carrying a gray storage box. She placed it on my table. I kept telling myself I'd throw these away. I lifted the lid. Folders, printed emails, statements, notes in Miriam's handwriting, years of them. Then she handed me one envelope separately. This is the one Graham was most afraid you'd see. I looked at her. What is it? Open it. Inside was an old internal memo. At the bottom was Graham's name, and beneath it, one sentence highlighted in yellow. A sentence written during the exact month he convinced me to sell part of my company. I read it twice, then a third time, because Graham had known the business wasn't running out of money. He had known the entire time, and the sale I thought saved my company had actually benefited someone else, someone very close to him. The person who benefited from the sale was Graham's brother, Marina Ellsworth. I read his name at the bottom of the memo and felt something inside me go completely still. Elliot had never worked for my company. He had never invested in it. He had never even shown much interest in what I did. But 3 weeks after I sold part of my ownership, a holding company connected to Elliot acquired a portion of those shares at a reduced price. I looked at Miriam. You knew about this? Not then. When? Months later. By the time I found the connection, you and I weren't speaking. I lowered the paper. Why didn't you come to me? Miriam's expression tightened. I almost did. Almost? Graham called me first. That made me freeze. What did he say? He said you were going through a difficult period, that I needed to leave you alone. He made it sound like contacting you would hurt you. Of course he did. Even in my absence, Graham had spoken for me. Miriam reached into the box and pulled out another document. This is why I kept everything. It was an email Graham had sent to our accountant. The subject line was simple: reserve adjustment. The message itself was short. He instructed the accountant to delay reporting certain transfers until after the planned ownership restructuring. Then came the sentence that made my hands tremble. Marina does not need to be included on this thread. I will brief her separately. He never briefed me. Instead, he told me we were nearly out of cash. I sold part of the company under pressure. Then his brother quietly benefited. I wanted to be furious. Instead, I felt tired. Not weak, just finished. Finished arguing with memories. Finished trying to make Graham's version of events fit reality. Finished wondering whether I had imagined the things that felt wrong. Miriam sat across from me. What are you going to do? I looked at the box. Nothing today? She seemed surprised. Nothing? I've spent years reacting to Graham. I closed the folder. If I move too fast now, I'm still reacting. That morning became the beginning of my reconstruction. Not revenge, reconstruction. I called an attorney who specialized in business disputes and financial records. I gave her copies of everything. Then I called Daniel at the bank and requested the complete historical documentation I was entitled to access. I created a new account at a different institution. Only my name, only my phone number, only my email. No shared passwords, no family contacts, no Graham. For the first time in years, the quiet felt clean. I also called my accountant, a new one, someone who had never met my husband, my parents, or my sister. I wanted numbers without family history attached to them. For several weeks, I barely spoke to anyone outside work. My mother called repeatedly. I didn't answer. My father sent messages accusing me of punishing them. I saved everyone. Graham tried something different. At first, anger, then reason, then nostalgia. We should talk like adults. Later, you know I always protected you. Then, whatever mistakes were made, we built a life together. That one sat on my screen for a long time. We had built a life together. That was true. But apparently, he had also built a second version underneath it. One where my success became family money, where my consent was flexible, where my signature could be imitated, where my questions could be delayed until I stopped asking them. I didn't respond. Instead, I went back to work. That surprised everyone, including me. I had expected the truth to destroy my concentration. Instead, it gave me some back. I reopened relationships with former clients. I met Miriam for coffee twice. We didn't pretend 4 lost years could disappear. We talked carefully, sometimes painfully, but honestly. One afternoon, Miriam said, "You know what changed most?" "What?" "You stopped explaining yourself before anyone asks." I laughed. She was right. For years, every decision had come with a defense. Why I spent money, why I worked late, why I disagreed, why I needed privacy. Now, I simply made choices. Slowly, my life became mine again. Then, almost 6 weeks after the bank incident, my attorney called. "Marina, we finished tracing the ownership transaction." I stood up from my desk. "And there is a problem for Graham." My heart accelerated. "What kind of problem?" "The shares acquired through Elliot's company were never fully paid for." I frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "It will." She paused. "Because the money used for the initial payment came from your reserve account." I said nothing. She continued. "In other words, funds connected to your business were moved out, then indirectly used to buy part of your own company back from you." I sat down. For a moment, I couldn't process the sentence. Graham hadn't merely benefited from my sale. He had helped create the crisis, then used my own money to profit from the solution. But my attorney wasn't finished. "There's one more thing." "What?" "Those shares changed hands again after your divorce." I gripped the phone. "To whom?" She gave me the answer. And suddenly I understood why Graham had been so desperate to keep me away from the bank. The shares weren't with Elliot anymore. They had been transferred, back to Graham. When my attorney told me the shares had been transferred to Graham, I didn't feel shocked. That surprised me. 6 weeks earlier, the news would have broken something in me. Now it simply confirmed what I had finally learned to accept. Graham had not made one bad decision. He had built a system, and systems leave patterns. "Can he keep those shares?" I asked. "Not necessarily," my attorney said, "especially if the original transaction was funded with money taken from your reserve account without proper authorization." I looked through the glass wall of my office. People were moving between desks, answering phones, carrying coffee, discussing projects. Normal life. For years I had thought my world would end if the truth about my marriage ever became visible. It hadn't. The truth had simply made the walls less confusing. What happens next? We document everything. We don't confront him yet. That suited me. Graham expected confrontation. He knew how to perform during confrontation. He could become calm when I became upset. He could become wounded when I became calm. He always needed a role, so I refused to give him a scene. Instead, I kept working. I met with accountants, reviewed old statements, rebuilt the timeline. Miriam helped when she could, but she never tried to become my rescuer. That mattered to me. She gave me information and let me decide what to do with it. That was something I had not realized I was missing for years. Choice. A few days later, Graham sent me a message. "We need to settle the house issue." Our former home had not yet been sold. The divorce agreement required both of us to cooperate with the sale, but Graham had delayed several appointments and rejected 2 offers. At first, I assumed it was another way to keep me tied to him. Now I wondered whether there was a financial reason. I forwarded the message to my attorney. Her answer came quickly. "Do not discuss finances with him alone." So I didn't. Then Graham tried again. "You can't avoid me forever." I ignored that too. That evening, my mother called from a number. Didn't recognize. I answered, before realizing who it was. "Marina." I nearly hung up. Then she said, "Please, just listen." I stayed silent. "Your father isn't sleeping." I looked out my kitchen window. "Is that why you called?" "He thinks you're going to take legal action against us. You took money from my business. We thought Graham had your permission." I closed my eyes. There it was. The new version. Not denial, distance. Suddenly Graham had acted alone. "Mom, you received the money." "I know. For years. I know. And you never asked me." Her voice cracked slightly. I was embarrassed. That answer felt more real than anything she had said before. I didn't forgive her, but I listened. She told me my father's investment had gone badly somewhere else. They had debt. Medical expenses had added pressure. Graham offered to move some money temporarily. At first, She believed I knew. Later she realized I probably didn't. And you kept accepting it? She went quiet. Yes, that one word carried more weight than all her explanations. Finally, no excuse. Just yes. I sat down. Why did Dad sign the authorization? Graham told him it was necessary for the investment paperwork. And my signature? I don't know. I believed she didn't know, at least about that part. Then she said something unexpected. Marina, Graham is scared. I stared at the wall. How do you know? He came here yesterday. What did he want? He asked whether we still had copies of old business documents. My pulse changed. What documents? The papers from your father's investment. I stood. Did you give him anything? No. For the first time in weeks, I heard something firm in my mother's voice. I told him I wasn't helping anymore. I didn't know what to say. She continued. He was angry. Did he say why he needed them? No, but he kept asking about a blue folder your father used to keep. I knew the folder. My father stored original investment papers there. Signatures, bank correspondence, early company documents. Where is it now? My mother hesitated. Your father gave it to me this morning. I gripped the phone. Why? Because he finally read through it. A cold feeling moved through me. And he found something. What? He wouldn't explain it over the phone. I nearly laughed at the absurdity. Of course. Another secret. Another document. Another man deciding when I was allowed to know something. But my mother surprised me again. He wants to bring it to you. When? Tomorrow. I looked at the clock, then at the stack of documents on my table. The past was moving toward me now. Not in memories, in paper, in signatures, in dates. And Graham knew it. That night, he called 7 times. I didn't answer. Then, just after 11, one message arrived. It was different from the others. No anger, no accusation, just one sentence. Marina, if your father gives you that folder, don't open it until you've spoken to me. I read it once, then again. And for the first time since this began, I smiled the same way I had smiled outside that grocery store, because Graham had just told me exactly where the truth was. My father arrived the next morning carrying the blue folder against his chest. He looked older than he had 6 weeks earlier. Not physically, exactly. More like someone who had finally been forced to examine a choice he had spent years defending. I opened the door. Come in. He stepped inside without speaking. My mother wasn't with him. Neither was Graham. That mattered. For once, my father had come alone. We sat at the kitchen table. The fraying folder remained between us. I didn't touch it. What did you find? I asked. My father looked at his hands. I owe you an apology. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because Richard Vale did not apologize easily, especially to me. For which part? He accepted that. All of it, probably. The answer was imperfect, but it was honest. He pushed the folder toward me. When I invested in your company, Graham brought me several documents. I know. He said they were routine. He told me your accountant had approved them. Did you read them? His face tightened. Not carefully enough. I felt anger rise, but I didn't let it take over. What did you think you were signing? Permission for Graham to help manage the investment. Why him? My father looked away. That question embarrassed him more than anything else. Finally, he said, because I trusted him. More than me, I thought. I didn't say it. I didn't need to. He understood. You thought I was irresponsible. I thought you were talented, he said quietly. But I also thought Graham was more disciplined. There it was. The old family judgment. Graham was disciplined. I was emotional. Graham was practical. I was ambitious. He could manage. I needed managing. My father opened the folder. Then I found this. He handed me a letter from the bank. It was dated less than a month after his investment. The letter confirmed that administrative authority had been granted to Graham, but attached to it was another page, a copy of the authorization request. My father's signature was there. Mine was there too, the copied one. I stared at it. I already saw something like this. Keep reading. Below the signatures was a handwritten note. I recognized Graham's writing immediately. Richard approved. Marina doesn't need to be bothered with this while she's dealing with the expansion. My stomach tightened. He wrote that? My father nodded. Apparently he gave this copy to the bank representative. I looked closer. There was another note beneath it, written by someone else. Primary owner confirmation still required. My pulse accelerated. So they knew? They asked for confirmation. Did they get it? My father pulled another page from the folder. An email. Sent. From an address that looked like mine. Almost. My actual email ended in my company domain. This one had one letter reversed. I read the message. It confirmed approval. Short. Professional. Fake. I looked at my father. That isn't my email. I know. The room became very quiet. This was bigger than copying a signature. Someone had created a near-identical email address and used it to impersonate me, and there was no reason to wonder who benefited. My phone rang. Graham. I let it ring. My father watched the screen. He called me last night too. What did he say? He told me you were confused, that your attorney was filling your head with things. I shook my head. Of course. He wanted the folder, and you said no. Yes. That single word did not erase what my father had done, but it was the first time I could remember him choosing my right to know over Graham's comfort. Then the doorbell rang. My father and I looked at each other. I hadn't invited anyone. I walked to the front window. Graham's car was parked at the curb. Of course. My phone lit up again. Then a message. "I know your father is there. We need to talk now." My father stood. "Don't open the door." I looked at him. The irony almost hurt. For years he had told me to listen to Graham. Now he was warning me not to. Graham rang the bell again, then again. I stayed where I was. A minute later, another message arrived. "You have documents that belong to me." That was his mistake. Not our documents. Not family papers. Mine. He had just claimed them. I showed the message to my father. His face changed. He said they were routine investment records. I looked at the blue folder. They weren't. My father sat down heavily. Then, from inside the folder, one loose page slipped onto the floor. I bent down and picked it up. It was a transfer instruction. I nearly dismissed it because I had already seen so many. Then I noticed the date, 2 days after my divorce was finalized, and the destination account. Not my mother's, not Elliot's, not Graham's. A trust account. I looked at my father. "Do you know what this is?" He shook his head. I read the beneficiary line. Then everything clicked into place. The house, the delayed sale, the shares, the sudden cancellation of my credit card. Graham had not been trying to punish me over groceries. He was trying to force a financial separation before one final transfer became visible. And that transfer connected every hidden piece of the story. The beneficiary on the trust account was me. I read my own name twice. Then I looked at my father. Why would Graham transfer money into a trust for me? He stared at the page. I don't know, but something was wrong. Graham had spent years moving money away from my control. He had no reason to suddenly protect it for me, unless the trust wasn't what it appeared to be. I called my attorney immediately. I sent her a photo of the document and waited while she pulled the records. Graham was still outside. He rang the doorbell once more, then stopped. 10 minutes later, my attorney called back. Her first words were, "Do not give Graham that document." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" "The trust was created during your marriage." "I've never heard of it." "I believe that." She paused. "But there's something you need to understand." I sat down. My father stayed across from me. "The trust lists you as beneficiary," she continued. "But Graham was named trustee." "Of course he was. So he controlled it?" "He controlled distributions." I looked at the transfer amount again. It was substantial. Where did the money come from? That is the important part. She had traced it. The funds came from proceeds related to the shares Graham's brother had acquired. Shares that had originally been purchased using money from my own reserve account. My money had been moved out, used to help buy part of my company, transferred through Elliot, then eventually moved into a trust with my name on it. It looked almost legitimate from a distance. That was the genius of it. Not hidden money, repackaged money. My attorney continued. "There is more." I closed my eyes briefly. There always is. "The trust contains a clause connected to your former marital residence." I looked toward the window. The house Graham had refused to sell. What clause? If the property remained jointly owned, Graham retained broad authority to make certain distributions for expenses connected to assets classified as shared. Obligations. I understood slowly. He needed the house to stay in both our names. Yes, that was why he rejected the offers, why he delayed appointments, why every conversation about selling became an argument. The house wasn't sentimental. It was a bridge, a financial connection he needed to keep alive. Then the credit card suddenly made sense too. Graham had canceled access because he wanted to create a clean-looking record. Separate finances, separate spending, separate lives, except the older structures beneath them were still connected. And by reporting the card, he triggered the review that exposed everything. I laughed. I couldn't help it. My father looked confused. What? He did this to himself. For years, Graham had controlled information because he always knew more than I did. Then one petty decision changed that. He wanted me embarrassed at a grocery store. Instead, he sent me directly to the one place where his entire system could be seen. My attorney spoke again. "Marina, there's another issue." My laughter stopped. "What?" "The 37 calls." I looked at my phone. I had counted them that first day. 37 missed calls. What about them? "The timing matters." She explained that when Daniel suspended Graham's administrative access, the bank also temporarily stopped a pending transaction connected to the trust. A transaction scheduled for that afternoon. My pulse accelerated. "How much?" she told me. It was almost the exact amount remaining from the share proceeds. Nearly everything. Where was it going? She was quiet for a second. Then she gave me the destination. A corporate account controlled by Graham, not Elliot, not my parents. Graham. He had been hours away from moving the last major piece of money beyond my immediate reach. Then he canceled my card. I went to the bank. The security review began. His access was suspended, and the transfer stopped. That was why he called. Not because he cared about the credit card, not because he was angry I had frozen an account. He was watching years of planning collapse in real time. My father covered his mouth. He knew. Yes. All those years? I looked at him. You helped him. The words hurt both of us. My Father lowered his eyes. I didn't know what I was helping. No, I kept my voice level. But you never asked me. He nodded. There was no defense left. Outside, Graham finally returned to his car, but before he drove away, my phone received one last message. You don't understand what those documents mean. I stared at it. For years, that sentence would have worked. He would explain. I would doubt myself. He would become the expert on my own life. Not anymore. I typed my first reply since the bank. I understand enough. From now on, speak to my attorney. Then I blocked his number. My hand didn't shake. 2 hours after he told me I would have to pay for everything myself, Graham had 37 missed calls on my phone. But now I finally knew the truth. He hadn't been calling because he had power over me. He had been calling because, for the first time, he had lost it. And the next person to call me was about to make sure he couldn't get it back. The next call came from Daniel. Ms. Ellsworth, the bank's review is complete enough for us to take permanent action on your access. Permanent. That word landed differently now. For years, Graham had made temporary decisions that somehow became permanent realities. A password he needed for convenience. A document he would handle this once. A transfer he would explain later. This time, permanent meant something else. It meant the doors were closing behind him. Daniel confirmed that Graham's administrative privileges had been removed from every account where I remained the legal owner or primary holder. Any pending transactions connected to disputed authority had been stopped. New authentication was required. New contact details. New security questions. Nothing linked to Graham. When I ended the call, I sat at my kitchen table for several minutes without moving. My father was still there. He looked at me carefully. What happens to the money? I don't know yet. And Graham? I don't know that either. He nodded. Then, after a long silence, he said, I should have trusted you. I looked at him. There were 100 things I could have said. That he trusted Graham because Graham sounded more like the kind of person he believed should handle money. That he had treated my success as something impressive but unstable. That every time he sided with my husband, he made it easier for me to doubt myself. Instead, I said the thing that mattered most. Yes, you should have. My father lowered his eyes. I did not comfort him. That was new for me too. For years, whenever someone hurt me and then felt guilty about it, I rushed to make their guilt smaller. I told them I understood. I said they meant well. I softened my own pain so they could live more comfortably beside it. Not this time. He had to carry his part. So did my mother. So did Graham. Later that afternoon, my attorney sent formal notices regarding the disputed transactions, the share transfer, and the trust. Everything had shifted from family argument to documentation. That changed people quickly. My mother's messages stopped being defensive. They became short. I have sent your attorney. Every statement I still have. Then, I am sorry I accepted money I knew you had not personally offered. That was the first apology from her that did not contain Graham's name. I read it several times. I still didn't answer. An apology can be sincere and still not repair what happened. Both things can be true. My sister Natalie called that evening. I nearly ignored her. Then I remembered the jokes. The years of hearing her say Graham was the sensible one. I answered. Marina? She sounded nervous. Mom told me. Which part? Apparently that question had become necessary in my family. Natalie exhaled. Most of it. I waited. I owe you an apology too. I leaned against the counter. For what? For treating you like you were always overreacting. That surprised me. Natalie continued. Graham used to call me after you two argued. My grip tightened on the phone. What? He'd tell me, you were stressed, that work was getting to you, that he needed help calming things down. A bitter laugh escaped me. He recruited you. I didn't see it that way. I know. And when you two divorced, he kept doing it. Of course he did. Graham had not only controlled financial information, he had controlled the family narrative. He always arrived first. By the time I explained myself, everyone had already been given a version of me. Difficult, emotional, confused, ungrateful. I suddenly understood why every family conversation had felt like entering a room where the verdict had already been written. Natalie started crying quietly. I believed him. I know. Do you hate me? No. That answer was easy. Forgiveness was not. Trust was not. I just don't know what our relationship looks like now. She became quiet. That's fair. For once, nobody asked me to make things comfortable. That felt strangely peaceful. 2 days later, Graham's attorney contacted mine. They wanted a meeting, not to apologize, to negotiate. Graham was suddenly willing to cooperate with the sale of the house. He was willing to relinquish the disputed shares. He was willing to surrender any claim of authority over the trust. All of it. My attorney read the offer to me over the phone. Then she said, he wants this resolved quietly. I looked out my office window. Of course he did. Graham had spent years benefiting from quiet. Quiet signatures, quiet transfers, quiet family pressure, quiet doubt. Now quiet was suddenly expensive. What do you want to do? My attorney asked. I thought about it. Then I said, I don't want revenge. I know. I want everything returned to the position it should have been in before he started making decisions for me. That may be possible. And I want every document corrected. She paused. Every document? Every one. Ownership, authority, account records, the house, everything. For once, I didn't want a dramatic ending. I wanted accuracy. That terrified Graham more, because anger can be dismissed. Facts stay. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. Before it happened, though, I received one final letter from Graham. Not from his attorney. From him. I almost threw it away. Unopened. Then I noticed the first line through the envelope window. Marina, I need you to understand why I did it. For years, that sentence would have pulled me in immediately. This time, I placed the letter on the table and left it there overnight. Because the most important thing Graham still hadn't understood was simple. I no longer needed his explanation in order to believe my own experience. And when I finally opened that letter the next morning, I discovered he had made one last mistake. He admitted more than he realized. Graham's letter was 4 pages long. I only needed 1 paragraph. He wrote that he had started moving money because he believed I was too focused on growth to understand the risks surrounding the company. He said he had involved my father because Richard was more practical. He said the transfers to my mother were meant to solve family problems without distracting me. Then came the sentence my attorney circled. I made decisions in Marina's name because I believed she would eventually agree they were necessary. I stared at it. There it was. Not an apology, an admission. He believed my consent could be replaced by his judgment. That was the center of everything. At the meeting a few days later, Graham sat across from me in a conference room with his attorney beside him. My attorney sat to my right. There were no family members, no audience, no shouting. Graham looked tired. For the first time since I had known him, he also looked uncertain. He glanced at me. You read my letter? Yes, I meant what I said. I know. His expression softened slightly, as if he thought that was progress. Then I continued. That is the problem. He frowned. Marina, I was trying to protect what we built. You were protecting your control over it. That isn't fair. I almost smiled. Fair. After everything, he still wanted to debate the wording. My attorney placed several documents on the table, corrected ownership records, the agreement regarding the disputed shares, the trust amendment, the house sale authorization. Graham looked down at them. You're really doing all of this? I met his eyes. Yes. He leaned back. You could have just talked to me. That sentence might have hurt once. Now it only sounded absurd. I talked to you for years. He shook his head. No, you argued. Because every time I questioned you, you told me I didn't understand. You didn't understand everything. No, I said, because you made sure I didn't. Silence. His attorney looked down at the table. Graham's face tightened. I carried that family. You controlled information. I paid bills with accounts I built. I managed your parents. They were not yours to manage. I kept your company alive. That one finally made me lean forward. No, my voice stayed quiet. Miriam and I built that company. My employees kept it alive. My clients trusted it. You created a crisis, then convinced me you were solving it. His jaw tightened. You're rewriting history. I reached into my folder and removed the email. The one telling accounting not to include me. Then the false authorization. Then the transfer instructions. Then his letter. I placed them in a line between us. No, I said. I finally have the original version. He had nothing to say to that. For several seconds, all I could hear was the air conditioning. Then Graham looked at me differently. Not with anger, with something closer to disbelief. You really don't need me anymore. There it was, the sentence underneath all the others. I thought about the grocery store, the declined card. His voice telling me I would have to pay for everything myself, as if that were the worst thing he could imagine happening to me. Paying for myself, deciding for myself, standing on my own. He had mistaken dependence for love and control for partnership. No, I said, I don't. He looked away. The meeting continued. The disputed shares would be returned. The trust would be placed outside his control. The house would finally be sold. Every administrative privilege he still possessed would be removed. The money transferred to my mother would be documented and addressed separately through our attorneys. I didn't demand humiliation. I didn't ask him to confess in front of anyone. I didn't need him ruined. I needed the structure corrected. By the end of the meeting, Graham signed the last page. His hand hesitated over the signature line. Then he signed. For years, signatures had been used to take decisions away from me. That day, one finally gave them back. When we stood to leave, Graham said my name. I turned. Was any of it real? The question surprised me. I thought about our first house, the sparkling cider, the nights we laughed before everything became a negotiation. Yes, I said. Some of it was. He waited. But real love doesn't give someone the right to replace another person's voice. His eyes dropped. I walked out. My father called later that evening. He asked if the meeting was over. Yes. Did Graham sign? Yes, a pause. Then my father said, I am sorry I made it easier for him. That apology landed differently. Specific. No excuses. I accepted that he had said it. I did not tell him everything was fine. My mother was learning the same lesson. So was Natalie. Relationships did not return to normal. Normal had been part of the problem. We were building something slower, with boundaries, with questions, with the possibility of hearing no. And Miriam? She remained in my life, not as before, maybe something better. We had coffee one Friday, and she smiled when I told her the shares were coming back. You know what the strangest part is? I said. What? This all started because Graham wanted to embarrass me over a credit card. Miriam laughed. That's not why it started. I looked at her. No? She shook her head. It started years earlier. She was right. The card didn't begin the story. It ended the illusion. A few days later, I returned to the same grocery store, same parking lot, same entrance. I stood in line with a basket in my hand. When it was my turn, I reached into my wallet. There was a new card inside, a plain one, nothing impressive. My account, my name, my responsibility. The cashier smiled. Credit or debit? I looked down at the card and smiled. Mine, I almost said. Instead, I simply answered, credit. The payment went through instantly, but the real ending wasn't on that receipt. It was waiting for me 2 days later, when the final document arrived from the bank, the one that would close the circle completely. The final document arrived in a white envelope from the bank. I almost left it unopened. By then, the important parts were already settled. The disputed shares were being restored. The house was finally under contract. Graham no longer had access to any account connected to me. The trust had been restructured. My parents were working through repayment arrangements with my attorney. Nothing about my life was simple, but it was mine again. Still, I opened the envelope. Inside was a formal summary of the bank's review. I read the first page standing at my kitchen counter. Then I reached the section about the credit card, and I laughed. Not loudly, just once, because the entire story had started with Graham telling me, I canceled your card, except he hadn't. He couldn't. The bank's final report confirmed what Daniel had first explained to me that morning. I had always been the primary account holder. Graham had only been an authorized user. When he reported his card and tried to remove what he believed was my access, the security review instead exposed irregularities connected to his own permissions. In other words, Graham had tried to lock me out of something that had never belonged to him, and by doing it, he unlocked everything I needed to see. I sat down at the table. For a moment, I thought about calling him. There would have been something satisfying about reading the report aloud, about reminding him of the grocery store, the declined payment, the 37 calls, but I didn't. That version of victory didn't interest me anymore. Graham already knew what had happened. More importantly, I knew. That was enough. A week later, the house sold. I expected to feel grief when I handed over the keys. Instead, I stood in the empty living room and remembered how much of myself I had lost there, not all at once. That was the dangerous part. A little confidence here, a little independence there. A decision surrendered because arguing felt exhausting. A question left unasked because everyone said I was overthinking. The house hadn't been a prison. No one had needed to lock the door. I had simply learned to doubt whether I had the right to open it. I placed the keys on the counter and walked out. My relationship with my parents changed too. My mother no longer called every evening. My father no longer offered financial advice unless I asked. Some conversations were uncomfortable. Some ended early. That was healthier than pretending. Natalie and I started over carefully. She once told me, I wish I had noticed sooner. I answered, so do I. And we left it there. No dramatic forgiveness. No promise that everything would return to normal, because I didn't want normal back. Miriam and I slowly rebuilt something as well. One afternoon, months later, she came into my office carrying coffee. She placed one cup beside me. Do you still check the reserve account every morning? I smiled. Every single morning. Good. Then she sat down across from me. The company was different now. So was I. I no longer measured strength by how much pressure I could quietly tolerate. I no longer confused being needed with being valued. And I stopped explaining ordinary decisions, as though I were asking permission to exist. One morning, much later, I went back to the same grocery store where my card had been declined. I didn't plan it. I simply needed groceries. The cashier was different. The weather was warmer. Life had moved on. I loaded bread, fruit, coffee, and a ridiculous amount of pasta into my cart. At the register, I pulled out my card. My card. A small thing. An ordinary thing. I tapped it against the reader. Approved. I smiled, and suddenly I remembered Graham's voice. You'll have to pay for everything yourself now. At the time, he meant it as punishment. Now I understood why the sentence no longer hurt. He had accidentally described freedom, not because independence means never accepting help. It means help does not come with ownership. It means love does not require surrendering your signature. It means family does not get unlimited access simply because they are family. And it means another person's confidence does not automatically make them right. The cashier handed me the receipt. Have a good day. You too. I walked outside carrying my own bags. For years, I thought the most painful part of my marriage was discovering how much Graham had hidden from me. It wasn't. The hardest part was discovering how often I had ignored myself because everyone else sounded so certain. But that was also where the story changed. I started listening again to my instincts, to uncomfortable questions, to the silence that appeared whenever someone didn't want me looking too closely. That morning at the bank, Graham called me 37 times because he thought he was losing control of an account. He was wrong. He was losing control of the story. For years, he had told everyone who I was. Emotional, careless, dependent, someone who needed him to manage the difficult parts of life. Then one canceled card gave me the chance to see the records for myself. And records don't care who sounds more convincing. As I reached my car, my phone vibrated. For 1 second, the old reflex returned. I looked down. Not Graham, not my parents. It was Miriam. Coffee tomorrow? I smiled. Absolutely. Then I put the phone away. No missed calls, no explanations waiting, no one demanding that I ask permission before making the next move. I opened the trunk and loaded the groceries inside. The first time I stood in that parking lot, I thought my card had been taken away. I know better now. Nothing important was taken from me that day. Something was returned. My name, my choices, my voice. And when I drove away, I didn't look back.